The correction itself was simple, and that is why it stayed with me. A mentor figure, or at least a voice carrying that function, cut through the atmosphere with one clean law. Meaning never cancels consequence. I remember how it landed, not as poetry, as a check in the body, a halt. Something in me started listening. That interruption mattered, because by then I had already begun to understand how easily spiritual language can drift into exemption. A person starts speaking as if depth places him beyond ordinary standards, beyond law, beyond the effect he has on other people. But the wiser traditions and the wiser people inside them do not confuse intensity with permission. They know that certain experiences may need spiritual environments rather than immediate diagnosis. But they also know that no insight cancels responsibility. That is why the Sphinx belongs here. The riddle is not there to flatter the traveler. It is there to test whether he is mature enough to proceed. That was the myth. Mirror, not punishment. Explanation, a threshold asking whether insight has become responsibility yet. Psychologically, the correction mattered because inflation hates being questioned. The ego wants affirmation, especially when it has wrapped itself in spiritual language. But a real test does not care how meaningful your experience felt. It asks whether you can still think clearly, behave lawfully, and remain accountable inside it. It asks whether you can be protected and corrected without calling that oppression. It asks whether the people around you can name risk without being cast as enemies of the sacred. That is where many people go wrong. They hear concern and translate it into persecution. They hear restraint and translate it into suppression. But a real gatekeeper is often doing something merciful, holding the line where your self-story would otherwise keep expanding and drifting. So the thread became clearer, not vaguer. Sleep is spiritual technology. Body regulation is spiritual technology. Community, law, consequence, discipline, these are not the lower truths beneath mystical experience. They are the conditions that make mystical material survivable. And if I was ever going to speak honestly about these territories later, it would have to include this too. Dialogue matters. Not just between mystics and seekers, but between grounded people, clinicians, survivors, and anyone capable of naming risk without either pathologizing everything or romanticizing collapse. The correction was not a glamorous one. It was a sobering one. And because it was sobering, it was incredibly useful and valuable. A little later, a friend who had no interest in my mythology did something that saved me. He did not debate God. He did not praise my insights. He just watched me and asked, almost bored, "Are you sleeping?" I laughed it off at first. I tried to redirect him into the realm of symbols and transcendence, but he stayed with the body. He pointed out my jittery energy, the way my eyes kept darting, the way my sentences stacked on top of each other without landing fully. He became a threshold guardian without trying to be one. In the old Celtic hero trials, the hero does not pass because he can talk. He passes because he can endure the tests without losing his humanity. He keeps his word. He keeps his seat at the fire. He does not turn the tribe into an audience. That is what my friend was testing, whether he knew it or not. Could I accept structure without calling it oppression? Could I be told to slow down and actually slow down? Psychology would Call this social containment, the nervous system borrowing regulation from another human being. When I am destabilized, I do not need more stimulation. I need a mirror that refuses my performance. He offered that mirror, and it irritated me deeply because in my head, being questioned like that felt like being misunderstood. But in hindsight, the question was a mercy. If you are not sleeping, your mind starts forging meaning out of noise. You start calling adrenaline awakening. You start treating intensity as truth. That is how men fall into danger while still believing they are doing something noble and sacred. What he was really doing was standing as a witness without becoming an audience. He was not there to admire and applaud the process. He was there to help hold it. And the questions that mattered were the simplest ones. Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Are you moving? What actually works right now? What brings you back down? Which tools are helping and which ones are quietly falling apart? So I listened, I ate, I turned the lights down, I stopped feeding the fire with endless conversation. I let my body rest, and I learned something hard. Real initiation includes being held by other people, not admired and applauded, held. Community is not a crowd, it is accountability with care. And I needed it the most. Reality started intruding in small physical ways. Before I had a theory for it, the room would feel sharper. Sounds would carry a strange charge. My body would register tension before my mind found a story. I remember moments of standing still, noticing the air, noticing my breathing, noticing how ordinary environments had started to feel slightly altered from the inside. That sensory fact came first. It had the quality of standing on the edge of the known world and sensing that something deeper was near. It was a subtle intensification, as if the ordinary had become more permeable, like the veil had thinned. This is where these states become difficult to name. Across cultures, similar shifts have been framed in very different ways. Calling, vision, possession, threshold, gift, danger. Some traditions know how to distinguish between crisis, opening, delusion, obsession, and illumination with more nuance than the modern world often does. The vision quest frame helps only if it is used carefully. In indigenous solitude rites, withdrawal is contained by tradition, witness, and return. The person goes out, but not without a people, not without form, not without a way back. That is the part modern initiation usually forgets. The myth mirror is not private intensity. It is contained encounter. Psychologically, what was happening was not proof of special status. It was the mind and body entering a state of heightened significance. Madness, in the broad anthropological sense, can sometimes signal rupture and opening at once, but that does not make every charged atmosphere wise. Significance can become dangerous very quickly when it outruns interpretation, sleep, or community correction. And that is exactly the problem modern people face when openings arrive without the ancient containers. Because the point was never to become fascinated with altered states and altered atmospheres. The point was to survive it without surrendering discernment. There was a day when my body made the decision for me. I woke up and everything felt heavy. Not poetic heavy, physiological heavy. The muscles dull, the eyes dry, the mind trying to sprint while the nervous system kept hitting a wall. I wanted to force my way through. That old idea, if I just push a little bit harder, I will break through to something pure. But exhaustion is a guard dog. It does not negotiate. It just blocks the gate. It was one of the first times I could feel clearly that I was not fully in control in the way I had previously imagined. The body was issuing a correction before my philosophy did. That is why the Desert Fathers belong here. Those early Christian ascetics went into the desert and discovered that solitude does not automatically make you wise. It makes you honest. The desert strips you down until your real patterns appear. Your restlessness, your craving, your pride, your despair, your urge to dramatize everything. There is a dark night quality to that. A stripping away of consolations until you are left with the bare state of your own organism and that of your fractured and broken mind. The discipline was not some glamorous trance. My modern version was less holy looking and more practical. I had to admit my window of tolerance was narrower than my ambition. Psychology would call it stress physiology. The body does not read your philosophy books. It reads signals, danger or safety. If you chronically push, you live in threat. Then your thoughts become sharper, more paranoid, more certain. Panic and despair start dressing themselves up as visions and enlightenment. You begin mistaking dysregulation for revelation. So I stopped. I stopped trying to force the river of mind to behave like an obedient servant. And I learned that the nervous system is part of the initiation. If it collapses, your journey becomes a risk to you and to everyone around you. The desert taught the same lesson. No entry without readiness. The gatekeepers are not mystical. They are embodied. They are limits. And limits, respected, become safety. I told someone I trusted what was happening, not for applause and praise, but for accountability. If I started slipping, sleep gone, behaviors escalating, I wanted a reality check. Consequence is real, so is support. There came a point where the thread stopped being an explanation and started becoming a tool, one which I could actually reach for. Sometimes it was as basic as forcing myself to go to bed instead of chasing one more hour of significance. Sometimes it was choosing a meal, a walk, a call, a lawful next step, when part of me wanted to stay inside the intensity and interpret everything as beyond and special. That is what made it real. The dragon guarding treasure motif belongs here because the treasure is not fireworks. It is maturity. It is the ability to carry something back from the labyrinth without making it everyone else's burden. And the dragon is everything in you that would rather dramatize the process than submit to the boring disciplines that protect your life and the life of others. The myth mirror is exact. What guards the gold is not always outside you. Often it is your own resistance to structure, your own shadow, your own unintegrated hunger for intensity, your hunger for importance, for exemption. Psychologically, that clarifies something important. The thread was not, and it never is, a symbol of comfort. It was a practice of restraint. It interrupted compulsion. It reduced the distance between insight and behavior. It turned I know into I do. And because healing is cyclical rather than linear, the same lesson had to be chosen again and again. Old themes returned with new depth, but only if I could stay connected to the thread when they did. So whenever the material intensified, the response had to become simpler, not more mystical. Sleep and body and work and accountability and community and lawfulness and consequence. No grand speeches, no Sermon on the Mount, No sacred self-image, just a man choosing not to abandon the rope that leads back out from where he came. Over time, that rope became part of the medicine itself, not firework knowledge. Practical, steadfast return. Something I could actually name and trust because it worked in the body, in routine, in ordinary life. That is how the treasure becomes usable, not by seizing it dramatically, but by surviving your own inner dragon long enough to carry it responsibly.